Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest will bring with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Jeff Brown. He's a writer, director, and producer whose debut feature film, The Beach House, is currently streaming on Shudder. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
We're really excited to talk to you about the beach.
So excited to talk to you about The Beach House. Because I think we both watched it at Chattanooga.
We did.
And Terry and I were talking about it from Chattanooga, and it is so good.
Awesome.
Silence.
Yeah. No, this week has been really strange because it's like such a personal thing, and even like film festivals, it's not tons of people seeing it, and so then now this week it's like a lot of press and stuff, and it's like you're kind of sending off your baby to college. It's just been it's very surreal, and I'm wrapping my little brain around it still. But like, thank you. I'm so glad you guys saw it. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm thrilled to talk about it.
Hell awesome. Yeah! But before we do get to The Beach House, how did you get into horror?
Yeah, I've thought about that. Leading up to this, I've been infatuated with horror since I was a kid, since I was very young. And I think I remember even there were those horror books that were like Crestwood House. I think they were orange. I don't know if you remember those at all, but each one was devoted to like a different Universal monster. So there's like the Wolfman, and there was a ton of them in.
Oh my gosh, I do remember these books.
They're super cool. You can still kind of find them if you go digging. They're not that obscure, but the imagery, and the one I remember specifically was the Wolfman, and it had Werewolf of London with Henry Hull, the older one, instead of the Lon Chaney Jr. one. And that one really stuck out in my memory as something that I was just into. It showed pictures of the transformation. I mean, this is when I was a little kid. And then my father both of my parents are into movies, but my father in particular, and there was times when we were growing up that he would kind of show not horror movies. Like I think one of the many Brown family stories was when he tried to show Alien when it was on Cut TV, and I got scared from the opening credits, and I was like, "Dad, turn it off, turn it off." But I kind of blame him initially for anything with horror, but then as I got older, I stayed with it, and I always loved horror films. And even when I was in high school, I think a lot of my friends, that's what we kind of did. We would go to the video store and just walk the aisles and really just pick out different horror movies. But I always loved them kind of through these books, because when I came of age in like the 80s and 90s, and you couldn't necessarily find everything. So like these Universal horror movies, I never got to see until probably within the last, 10 years as they become more, easier to obtain. But back then you really couldn't see that. So it was one of those things where I was kind of imagining the movies as opposed to actually watching them.
Oh, interesting. That's kind of cool though.
Yeah, and then it got a little bit more advanced, I guess, as I got older. The public library had a couple really great books, and there was one in particular about fantastic cinema that went up to like 1984, and that book blew my little mind. And it was like they had chapters on Cronenberg, on Romero, on John Carpenter, and really some more obscure films. I grew up in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is a college town, and we had a decent video store, but it doesn't compare to like. I then went to NYU undergrad, and so I moved to New York when I was 18, and I went to one of the video stores in New York, and that was just like
mind blown.
It was mind blown. It was just like giving a junkie crack. I went crazy just seeing all these movies that I hadn't been able to see for years. I think while I was in film school, I kind of got away from horror a little bit. I think I started. The first couple projects I did in school were, they were very disgusting and kind of horror oriented. But I feel that like NYU kind of turns up their nose at horror, and I think New York City indie film also does. The big exception is Larry Fessenden, but he's kind of his own like.
He's his own, yeah. Yeah,
he's not really. I mean, he was in the city kind of in the '90s, but I think making low budget movies in New York City is just. Super expensive, so it kind of scares away a lot of the horror films. But then I got away from it in school, and then my short film that I tried to make when I was an undergrad was a disaster. And then it kind of dissuaded me from making anything for almost 10 years. And I was just working in production and writing. It was really trying to find a way for me to like get what was in my head like out on the page, which was a struggle for a while. But then the way I kind of figured that out was I wrote something that was horror. It was a very bizarro kind of short, and then that was it was nothing I've never made it, but it was something that I wrote, and that kind of got me back into writing fantastic cinema.
Cool.
It's so weird. A lot of the directors that we've talked to that went through film school seem to have the exact same experience where all of their professors turn their nose up against horror or, want them to tell like a boy and their dog type story or something like that. It's so weird since it's such a big thing. And like we're seeing now, as horror has matured a bit that you can tell,
I went to grad school and undergrad and did film studies, so I did like the writing part and not the filmmaking part. They also, especially in grad school, like no one had a specialty in horror. Like I had a really hard time finding an advisor because most people were like, "Oh, I specialize in like French film from the 1930s or like this, and this." But I was like avant-garde filmmaking, but no one ever really had any focus on horror, which was so confusing to me and strange because I always kind of got looked at weird for wanting to write scholarly work about horror films. And I don't understand. Like, they're such important pieces. Like, they're important cultural artifacts, regardless if you think they're shitty or not. And it's just very weird how, like, academia, either film studies or, like, film school, seems to still shun the genre.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to think as to why that might have. Why I think I went to film school in the late '90s, and I think horror was in a weird place then.
Okay, yeah.
But there were some. I mean, I think now maybe, especially in the last 6 or 7 years, I think the caliber of the horror. I mean, some of these movies, like the Robert Eggers movies, are just
right.
That's not fair to anybody.
I know that's exactly like I watched The Lighthouse, and it wasn't like my favorite movie of all time, but I was just like, oh my god, that guy, whoa, But in the 90s though, they were like very meta, and like Blair Witch Project is probably the most exemplary like horror film of that era in a weird way. Like the 90s up into September 11th, that film is not something you want to teach in film school, really. It's like
why not?
Well, I mean, you could. You could. It really breaks. It should not work, and that's like one of the many things as to why it's a great horror film. it just works so well. And that's another thing. My father's always like, why can't you make that movie? And I was like, Dad, that's lightning in a jar.
Oh my God. Hey, why can't you make Blair Witch Project?
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure to put on my shoulders, my friend.
Yeah, no, that's the Brown House. But
oh God.
Yeah, and then Paranormal Activity comes out, and it's like, well, that's, kind of the same thing. And it's like, I guess lightning hits the jar twice. And it's like, oh, okay, all right, great.
Found footage is not lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff, I'm obsessed with found footage, so I have a lot of feelings about it. So sorry, I love found footage. But we will not talk about it. Again, I always go off on tangents about it. I don't understand how it always happens.
Did you see Lake Mungo? Have you seen that?
Oh, have I seen Lake Mungo?
That's such a good, weird found footage movie. I was like kind of blown away by it. I don't love found footage, but when it works, like it really works. It does.
Yeah, I showed Lake Mungo to my partner a couple weeks ago, and he enjoyed it, but it wasn't what he was expecting, which I think is valid because it's like not at all what anyone probably is expecting when they see it for the first time, because it's like such a weird thing that seems so real. But like, because the way it is like a pseudo documentary, it's a documentary, but not actually.
Right.
And, it's just so good. It's so beautiful and sad. Terry, stop laughing at me.
So, you went to film school, but were you interested in film from being a kid, or how did you get interested in?
I was always interested in film, and it came to me. I think like it was not a revelation, but I think I stayed the night at a friend's house, and my family, we had those. They don't make them anymore, but they were like Leonard Maltin's Video Movie Guide, or
oh yeah,
and Roger Ebert's like books of reviews. Like we had a bunch of those in my house, and I think I went to a friend's house. I was like, "Well, where are your Video Movie Guys?" And like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "You guys don't, how do you look up movies?" And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's it was just one of those, like, it was something that was kind of easy. I remember movies. I used to really, really know them. It's now that there's so many films, I'm not quite as sharp as I once was, but at that time I really knew the movies. I knew who directed them. I knew who acted in them. And it was just this kind of like, it was just so easy for me. And then I think really the moment that I really tried to take it seriously, as there was an article in that magazine, Film Threat, about different film schools, and I remember putting that up in my locker, and that that could have been like in 6th grade. I mean, I was really, really young, and I think that was like, it was a chart about all the different film schools at that time. It was talking about which ones were good, which ones were worth your money, which ones were expensive, and I was always like, that was kind of one of the earliest things I can remember about wanting to get into film. And, it also, it's like, the Star Wars movies and Raiders of the Lost Ark were just part of my family. And, my brother and I were very much into movies together. We would keep track of how many times that, they say fuck in movies, which was
hell yeah, I love that.
It's just we would do weird things. We're my brother and I were kind of strange kids. It just kind of grew into this thing, and then the going to film school, where my parents were always dubious of it, because in Indiana making movies is not, nobody does that. Like at that time, I think that things could have changed. But it was, might as well have been on the moon. I had no idea how movies were made. It's like, I remember the first day of film school where I found out that film and sound were separate, because, on the old video cameras, they were the same. I was like, oh man, I'm in so far over my head.
I am in trouble.
I am doomed. And then, but I realized that, even the ones who pretended like they knew what they were talking about they were all full of it anyway. So.
Yes, correct. Were your parents like super into movies? It sounds like they were, since you had guides all over your house.
Definitely.
Okay.
I think my father initially, and then I think as I got deeper and deeper into it, and they saw that it wasn't going to go away, and I wasn't actually ever going to really grow up. I think my mother, my mother got more into it too, and now she kind of gravitates much more towards like indie films or character driven films, and my dad is. My dad's favorite movie is Casablanca, so he's a big old, he likes older movies, but he also likes, big action movies and
Okay.
that. But they're definitely into it, and then they've encouraged it. And they're always excited, to hear about whatever movie I was working on or things like that.
That's so cool. Have they seen The Beach House?
Oh yeah, they were at the U.S. premiere in Brooklyn. It was
amazing,
and they liked it. They said they liked it. So but they were very, they were very happy. It's like, this is kind of a long time coming, and they've heard about it for years. So it's like, finally they got to see it, and it was a lot of people that they knew, like a lot of my friends were there. And I think it was a really great night for the Brown family. And my brother hasn't seen the movie yet, so he's going to watch it tomorrow night. And I'm kind of like, there's like, my brother and I have a weird language almost, where it just consists of kind of references that only the two of us understand. And there's a couple things in the movie that I think are in our language, but I can't quite tell.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, it's weird.
So cool.
Maybe I can't remember if there is now. I'm going to watch it again tomorrow night too, and kind of celebrate it. And then, but I'm going to keep in, kind of text my brother if it's like, dude, that's like when we were kids.
Oh, it's amazing.
That's amazing.
So Jeff, you're talking about all the movies you've worked on. So you are a location manager for a lot of movies.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Can you tell us what it means to be a location manager for a film? I mean, it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I would love to hear from you, like, what the specifics of that is, like, of that position really is.
The location manager is the liaison between the production and kind of the real world. I
like the description, the real world.
It's like you're kind of you're protecting the production in a weird way, because
interesting.
It's especially in New York. I mean, all this is based in New York City, which is a very specific place to film and has its own sense of challenges that I don't think are replicated anywhere else in the country. I mean, all city filming is going to be kind of similar in a weird way, but I have no idea what it's like to film in LA. I can only imagine. So I'm hired. I would read this. I'm hired very early on in the process, and I would read the script and kind of do a breakdown based on all the locations, and work very logistically in terms of the schedule and kind of the constraints. And then I would either have scouts or scout myself and try to start presenting options to the production designer. And then he's kind of the first wave of offense. And if he likes something, I might scout 20 things. The production designer will like 5, and director will probably like 2 or 3. And then it's an extremely stressful job, because then after you've picked the locations, and you have to deal with contracts, insurance, I have a budget. It would be all those sorts of things. And in dealing with filming in the city, it can get pretty crazy, just because you have so many mouths to feed in such a weird way. And I kind of fell into it after, kind of not making the best student film ever made, which was my goal. And then I started at the bottom. I interned. That was one of the benefits of NYU, is just having being able to intern. Although I don't know if they still have interns, because I think there was a lawsuit about not paying people. So I don't know if people still intern at production companies. But when I did, it was independent film in New York was very. It was kind of still after what I consider the wave of Sundance. There was a sonic boom of independent film in like 89 to 92. And then it still filtered down when I started, I started kind of working 1999, 2000 as a PA. And then there was a time, and this kind of plays into the Beach House. When I started, there was a company called Indigent that was run by a filmmaker named Gary Winnick, who's since passed away. Their thing was modeled on the Dogma 95. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like The Celebration was like the first one, and that was kind of a big one when I was in film school, about kind of really minimalizing all the parameters. You had to use practical locations, you had to not use lighting, you had to use no dollies. Indigent did a kind of a similar thing, but it was much more about, there weren't really aesthetic rules, it was more kind of economic. And so they made, their whole thing was, you make the film in 15 days. The budget is like $150,000 to shoot, then like maybe $150,000 to finish, and the whole crew and cast get $100 a day in exchange for percentage points on the movie. And so Indigent made a bunch of these movies right around when I was kind of getting started, which is in 2000, 2001. And their first one was this film called Tadpole, which was sold then at Sundance for a huge number, against its $300,000 budget. So that was kind of, then all of these indie films were like, we're using the indigent model, which was a creative way for producers not to pay people. And then most of those movies and these they weren't indigent specifically. It was like different companies would be like, we're going to pay everyone $100 a day, just like Indigent. But then Indigent had some connections and they had really great casts. And so one of the first films I managed was Pieces of April with Katie Holmes, which was, and Peter Hedges was the director. Not genre at all, but it was an extremely stressful experience for me because I think I was like 23 or 24 and I had zero idea. Nobody told me how to location manage. I kind of,
oh no,
yeah, it was terrifying. So
wow,
I survived, and then eventually over time, I think then I managed that, but then I was an assistant manager on Spider-Man 3, which was a massive production. And that's
I was going to say, I saw that on IMDb and I was like, I wonder what that was like. Cause that is a huge movie.
Yeah.
Like just like scope wise, it's huge.
It was huge. I mean, it's not a great film, let's be honest. I don't think
you said it, not us.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it in years, but I
haven't either.
I don't really want to. I think I'm okay.
Yeah. I'm not a huge superhero fan anymore. Anyway, it was totally different. But the thing about it was that our location manager was a man named John Fedinich, who still is around. And I kind of saw how he managed. And then I realized, there's kind of a way to do this. And it's also kind of one of the things about filmmaking. There is no way. There's only approaches. Like there's no rule book to it. And even with production and locations, you just the best. It's kind of a bluff game. You like always have to look like you're not stressed, even though you are. And then it's kind of there's some similarities with directing, but not really. But a little bit of the structure of filmmaking is it needs to be fluid. You need to be able to adjust to things, even on a huge movie like Spider-Man 3. Like if it rains, they're not shooting in the rain. They're not that and you can't stop that. But it was really dealing with massive crowds and dealing with stunts and special effects and they prevised everything. So seeing how digital effects kind of play into it. And I think that was even kind of early in the whole like previs and digital effect thing. So I think it's just much more advanced now. But that was kind of my I have like different film schools, and like that was like film school number 3. I worked at a video store in the West Village as well when I was in school.
All right, sounds good.
So it's like that was film school number 2. So I have a lot of film schools.
That's amazing, though.
But so you did all of this, and then you finally did the Beach House. How did you? First, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Beach House for those that might not have seen it yet?
Yeah, the Beach House is a science fiction horror film about two couples who find themselves unwittingly at the same off-season beach house, and then weird things start happening.
Yes.
And listeners, we're going to talk about it and then have a spoiler section. So we'll put the time codes of that in the description of the podcast. But we're going to get into spoilers, and we'll let you know when we start talking about spoilers.
But how did you come up with this idea?
Yes, please.
So I thought about that a bit because I've had some kind of not great responses to it. But there's two parts of it. One is based on a production, kind of a boring, like, the necessity is the mother of invention, and kind of knowing what goes in those indigent movies. I always wanted to make an indigent horror movie. And so I think the producer, Sophia Lynn, who was involved with some indigent productions at that time, but we both came from the New York indie film world. And she and I, in our earliest stages, like, how can we do a very, very small, intimate film? And so kind of the parameters of 4 characters in one location. And I had toyed around with that idea even back when I was doing the indigent things, but the script never quite worked out, or it wasn't quite here. And then we met, I think it was around 2011, when we started talking about trying to make our own small film, because I think I was you get kind of frustrated working on movies in the locations capacity. especially on low budget films, because it's very hard on the crew. You know, you're really sacrificing a lot. And after you make a couple that are not good, and it's one of those things where I was like, well, I can do something better than that. And so then it was kind of time for me to put my money where my mouth was. Sophie and I talked about that, and I wrote the script. I started writing in 2011. We wrote a lot of drafts before we actually wound up shooting in 2017. So there was that. And then I remember a story my mother actually told me years ago, and I can't remember when she told it to me, but her family, her father and her two brothers went up fishing, and this must have been in the 50s, in a cabin in Minnesota. And they were like retired for the night, and they'd been drinking beer. And my grandfather woke up in the middle of the night and to go outside to pee. And he realized when he went outside, I think he threw up or he passed out, and he realized that there was a gas leak in the cabin, and he got his sons out. And that was, so that element of the gas leak in this remote house, and I thought about it kind of today, this morning, kind of thinking about where did this come from, really. And I think that's a big part of it, because there is that element in the beach house of a scene where, you know, the characters are not just seeing things, they're also smelling them, and they start feeling sick. Yeah. And so it was kind of like taking that and making it the biggest gas leak, you know, and the most dangerous gas leak ever. So that was
the world's most dangerous gas leak.
I mean, you know, exactly.
I love it.
That was one thing that I realized this second time watching it to prepare for this podcast, is that it does a very good job of explaining the different senses. Like I could almost like smell the smell based on all the characters talking about it, and the when the water, they turn on the water and it comes out all oily, and like it's a very like not sensual and sexy, but like sensual as in like the feelings. Like there's so much like different senses to it.
Yeah.
And that was definitely one of my one of my objectives or goals or whatever you want to say, or approaches, was that, you know, I definitely feel I like experiential films. I don't like, you know, I'm voiceover in movies can be good, but I typically don't like that. I do like movies that really put you in it, and which is, I think, actually kind of a trend. It's like these war films that are coming out are very much like experiential, but that was, you know, I wanted to be sensitive, and I think it's a very textural film, and that was, you know, the texture of all of the senses. And even what they eat and they smell things, and you hear things, and they taste things, and it's like the texture of the wood and the texture of the water. It was just some of these kind of aesthetic things that I wanted to, you know, utilize and kind of exploit in the movie. But that's another, it's like kind of texture in movies. I'm sensitive to it. I like it. I think that's always a key to movies, that, you know, even like film grain. And when we get into Pet Sematary, we can talk about kind of some of my triggers that I hit in both the remake and the original, that I was kind of like, but you know, that's something that's with working with our director of photography. He also responded very well to the texture, and I think we went to go see the French film Raw. The two of us went to go see that in the theater, and because I really love how a lot of European films look. I think that style of cinematography, it really appeals to me, and I kind of was like, you know, I would be like, can we do that? You know, I'd point at a picture, like, can you do that? And he's like, yeah, we can do that. I was like, okay, great, all right, you know. But that was, you know, that was the DP and I went to some concerts. We saw a bunch of movies together as part of the prep.
That just reminds me of one of my favorite scenes where, like, not a whole lot happens, but it's the scene where one of the characters starts walking out to sea.
Oh my God, Terry, that is also my favorite part. Should we just do a spoiler warning now?
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay, everyone, spoilers. If you haven't watched The Beach House yet, skip ahead to the time code we put in the podcast description. And watch The Beach House on Shudder. Why haven't you watched it already? Anyway, when Mitch walks into the ocean.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It is literally so like that entire sequence on the beach is so haunting and so beautiful.
Thank you. I'm so glad it worked. I mean, I think that actually that scene is one of the key reasons I think why one of our producers, who's kind of the key to it getting financed, I think he really responded to that scene in the script, and he had read it, I think, a couple of years before he actually got involved. And when it circled back around to him, he read it again and he was like, you changed the dialogue in that scene. It doesn't work as well. He's like, do you still have the old draft? And you should go back to Mitch's kind of dialogue at that. And he, cause it really, that was something that I think really resonated with him.
Yeah.
And then I went back and took that and kind of, that's what that's what's in the film. But yeah, it was, Cape Cod is again taking advantage of the location. Cape Cod has some of the most drastic tides in the world. And so, that scene, a lot of the things about the making of the movie, it kind of comes off easy. It seems easy, and really it was actually extremely difficult. Like we only had 2 or 3 days of sun in the entire shoot schedule. So that was like, we're running down to the beach and shooting those scenes with Mitch. We had to time the tides. So when we shot that scene, our AD was like, we have to shoot this at 9:30 or we're going to miss it. And it was like, we were shooting other stuff. And he's like, it's 9:25. It's like, he's going in the ocean. We got to do this.
He's going in the ocean. Get him in the ocean.
And the funny thing is that the locations guys, the two guys, the manager was named Travis Scott. And then the scout who just was one of my friends who just kind of showed up. He drove out to Cape Cod. He's like, I'm here to help out. And I was like, oh my God, it was a great moment. One of our scouts named Tom Whidden, and the two of them, Travis was a surfer, so he wore a wetsuit, and they did a photo study of him walking out into the ocean for a day to time where he was, where his head went up, and he brought all the pictures back. It was one of those
shit.
Yeah, it really worked well, but it was like another one of the many things on this that was a very fragile kind of delicate thing that just when you watch the finished product, it really seems like it was easy to do when it was actually not easy at all, and the water was freezing. I think Jake Weber wanted to kill me, and I don't think
that was actually on location in Cape Cod. Like there were no waves like that.
Yeah, that was. I mean,
that is amazing. That's so funny because my partner watched the movie with me, and he was like, "I want to go where there's no waves." That doesn't look real. I'm like, I'm going to ask him that exact question when we actually talk because it is such it seems so weird.
Yeah, Cape Cod is a very unique, beautiful place. I mean, it's kind of the painter Edward Hopper did a lot of paintings of kind of the area that we were filming in, and we were kind of saying there was the movies like Edward Hopper Goes to Hell, and so but there's the ocean side, which is much more typical ocean. It's very rough, and there's sharks, and we saw seals. On the other side. Cool. But then the side that the house was on is the bay side, and the bay side is much calmer, and they have those drastic tides.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just another thing where the script is kind of loose enough that we could take advantage of some of these natural things, which is definitely a goal I had when writing it. Just pay attention to the elements, and we were really at the mercy of the elements when we were shooting it, which is kind of plays into some of the themes of the movie.
Yes, and that whole scene is such a perfect moment because it is sort of like the turn of the movie where all of a sudden we got to talk about the foot.
We got to talk about the foot.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you that I am someone that walks barefoot like constantly, and that scene makes me want to never walk barefoot ever again.
It's one of those like. For me, it's like I'm not as nervous, but swimming in the ocean when you see a jellyfish, which I've seen many times, and you're always like, well, I don't want to touch that. That would be disgusting. And it's like, well, what's the worst scenario for experiencing a jellyfish? And I was like, well, stepping into a massive one, it's kind of like, what's the worst that could happen? Which, I think is a big thing for horror writers and directors. Is like, what is the absolute worst thing? And that to me would be, that would be it. But yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be. I wanted the movie to have two distinct halves to it, and there's actually a shot. Not to give too much away. Well, we can spoil.
We're in the spoiler section, so it's fine.
The camera's on its side, and that's when the movie literally turns.
Yes, when she's like, "Oh fuck."
Yeah, it might be at the exact midpoint of the movie, which is kind of weird, but that was something that it was one of the shots that it was kind of in my head. Everyone kind of everyone brings a lot to the production, and those were a couple of things that I really wanted. There's a wide shot of Emily on the beach. That was another one where I was like, we have to do that. We have to do that. And her climbing up the stairs is another shot that I wanted.
Iconic.
Yeah, and the sideways shot was another, because I was like, there's a lyric where it's like the world's turned upside down, and that was always kind of playing in my head when we were shooting it, even though I hadn't really thought of the song, which is I think by the band Talk Talk. It wasn't something I'd thought about consciously, but when we were shooting it, it's like, yeah, the world's turned upside down, and that's literally what I wanted to happen. And the foot scene is, it's supposed to, the viewer should be a little complacent, I think, by that point. When she steps on the jellyfish, the volume of the movie changes, it gets very loud. And
it does.
I wanted it to be jarring, and it's part of it was very intentional to do it that way. And thankfully the producers were open to kind of a more experimental approach to the script, having it be kind of 2 acts as opposed to like a more traditional structure, which I'm kind of sick of in movies anyway. It's we can move beyond the 3 acts or whatever, however they teach it in film school these days. I don't quite know, but yeah. And then the foot scene was another thing. It was really, it's how it kind of is in the script. It really came close to it. A lot of things are not how they were in the script, but that's one that was pretty close. And it was a very rough day of shooting. I think we did our most setups that day, but Liana was she's a total champ. She sells the hell out of every screen.
She really does. Like, I thought there was a real fucking giant worm in that girl's foot. Like, good Lord.
Maybe there was. No, I'm just kidding. But,
method acting. We put an actual worm in her foot.
But she was a super trooper. And it was towards the end of the shoot when we started getting into the more, grotesque stuff. I don't really remember. It's weird. The shoot is like one big blur to me. I can't be super specific to it. And it's actually remembering it as kind of dreamlike anymore. Yeah, we did a lot. It was a lot of shots, and we had our makeup artist who also had a background. Her name was Jennifer Suarez, and she kind of dealt with like kind of the on the face and bloody and sweat. And then our effects team was Pete Gerner, who works with a man named Brian Spears, does a lot of the New York horror, and I think they do the Marvel shows when those were shooting here too. And they do a lot of Larry Fessenden stuff. I think that they kind of, that's where they started. And I drove up to Brian's house like twice, and it's just like, it really is like just filled with heads and gore. And it's a really cool place. And then Pete Gerner was his guy that was on set. So Pete, and then our production designer, Paul Rice, kind of made a lot of the jellyfish, and he was really into the worms. He kind of made actual worms. He's a puppeteer. And so when we were shooting that, it's like Liana's sitting there and 4 dudes are like putting things on her foot, and it's like, ready to go. And we did all that. It was very, very chaotic, but we could feel it when we were shooting it. Like, the producers were producers can be pretty stoic and kind of keeping their cards close to their chest. But even when we were shooting that, they were all thumbs. Like, well, put a little more blood in that one. That's looking good, guys. And it was, it's pretty funny actually. Like when we were shooting it, but yeah, it really, and even the editor, our editor is named Aaron Crozier, who also has done a lot of horror films. I think he cut Girl on the Third Floor, which
that's a great movie.
Oh,
too.
yeah,
I liked it.
I love that movie.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was kind of I wasn't crazy about the trailer, but then I watched it and I was like, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And I really liked it. But he cut that, and he really put that scene together very, very well. I think that that was one of the first things that really came together with the movie. And even the score, I think Rolly's score, there were some other scenes that were very difficult music-wise because you kind of have to go from 0 to 60 very, very quickly. And but that scene, his sound was one of the things where he got it kind of instinctively, and just it stayed the way he initially did it throughout. There was no tweaking. And it just when I watch it with an audience, the audience is just cringing, and that was like totally the goal of the movie. So, way to go!
Jeez.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm so glad you guys like the movie.
Absolutely. But it does kind of lead into something that I am curious about, because you said you filmed this in 2017. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It's so weird because we both Mary Beth and I both watched this during the virtual Chattanooga Film Festival that I was hoping to attend in person this year before everything happened. And it's so weird watching this movie. It kind of adds to the nihilistic feel of some of the things that happen in this movie when I'm turning on the news and I'm looking outside and I can't leave the house.
Yeah.
Surprise, a pandemic made your film somehow even more relevant.
That's scary.
And terrifying.
It's scary. I think that for me, one of the more I was thinking more about climate change actually than any pandemics, but I think
that makes a lot of sense.
But pandemics kind of come with climate change, and there's also I keep bringing, even though the movie I don't think is ironic. I think the movie is a very kind of straightforward movie. It's not self-aware, but there's a savage irony to kind of going to vacation places and getting sick, and that was another thing that has happened to me. Not just in international traveling, but I went to, I think, a bachelor party when I was a kid. Not when I was a kid, but when I was younger, in Vegas, and it was going from very, very hot to these, air conditioned hotels where I got sick.
Oh wow,
and it's one of these things where you kind of prepare to have a good time or to or have a good date, or something romantic is just ruined by the weather or ruined by the food, or I think that happens a lot. And so that was another thing that I wanted, the irony of this vacation that's supposed to go on forever, and now we're on vacation forever in real life.
Well, and the male character even wants to continue this vacation like forever at this place. Randall wants to not have the kid, not have her go to school. Like, why don't we just stay here forever? And then, meh.
Yeah. Randall's character, I'm seeing that people aren't crazy. They don't like Randall.
I was going to say, how was it like writing one of the most asshole-ish boyfriend characters I've ever seen in a horror movie? And I mean that in a good way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of me and Randall, so I'm a little like, oh no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Not that. I mean, not in that sense.
Put it open mouth, insert foot.
No, but there's a lot of me and Emily as well. And there's a lot of me in the older character. I think, it's coming from me, and they're all kind of, it's like a mirror of the same, they're all representing different things in my head. And, I think that there is, something about rejecting adulthood there, especially for people who are privileged. I think that that's another aspect to the movie where if you have a beach house in your family, there's going to be some money there. I mean, so I think that something in America, especially right now, not especially right now, but something about what hard work and whatnot, and then you have people that are born into money and have privilege and don't ever have to work. And so what's the concept of work then? Like, what do you do? Like, and he's kind of got it made, and to have someone that doesn't see that is he's just like, why would you want anything else? This is beautiful. This is perfect. You're on the ocean. We can live here. We can do this. And I think that there's a seduction, and it's another thing about seducing the viewer to this environment, and then just having it, the fragility of life, the fragility of society. At the drop of a hat, it can go from, everything stops. And that's kind of, and I was thinking about that a little bit too, also that I've lived in New York now since 1996. I lived through September 11th. I've been through a blackout. I've been through 2 hurricanes. And now it's like we can put a pandemic into it. But in all the situations, the social order stops. It just stops. And it's a drastic change from what has been going on. And I also thought of it like a car accident where, you never prepare for a car accident. And then if you get into one, and it's horrible, but that is the rest of the day. If you survive, hopefully you survive, but like the rest of your day is going to revolve around that event. And that was something that I wanted. There's a sense of an accident or something that is not telegraphed by script structure, which, I wanted to be completely jarring. And I as much as, I think that it might feel like the two halves don't are totally separate, but they really aren't. They really mirror each other. They play off each other. Kind of there's if you kind of observe how the characters move, they're actually doing the same path, just in two different houses in both halves of the movie. But it's these are the things you notice when you've watched the movie 200 times.
Right.
Hopefully there's a truth to the film that, the fact that it does reflect what's happening right now is it's horrible. And I think I thought about it like I would not write the movie now if it's like, would you write this movie right now, starting during the pandemic? And I don't think I would. I think that it's for me, film is an escape and it's a fantasy and it's a dream. And my dreams are it's conceiving of the future, not just in terms of the future in front of us, but also the future of my life. Because if I can get the money to make a movie that's going to consume me for a while. So it's you are kind of, predicting the future in a sense. And it's just horrible that's how the movie resonates right now. It's just a horrible irony. Wow. But yeah.
So Terry, what have you been watching recently?
So just briefly, I watched this movie that felt it's really weird to watch it after watching The Beach House, because in some ways there's a lot of similarities to the first part of the movie. It's called The Rental.
Okay. Dave Franco's movie, right?
By Dave Franco.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
It is about two couples that they rent this vacation home on the side of a beach. They do drugs.
Hell yeah.
And they have stuff that happens, interpersonal problems that are going on between the four of them. And then something happens. So it's so weird to see this movie come out. And I'm seeing a little bit of similarities between the two, but then both movies go in completely different directions. And I love that about film, that you can watch something and you can see some of the things that are like, oh, this is similar to that, this is similar to that, but then they just diverge. And have either of you seen The Rental? Or had a chance to?
I have not seen it yet.
I'm familiar with it, and there are several. I haven't seen it yet. I'm very competitive, and there's a lot of other movies. It was like The Color Out of Space coming out, when I was like,
yep.
Damn it. Like, really? Why right now? Richard Stanley's going to come out of retirement or whatever right now and make that movie that, that's kind of, it plays in the Beach House. And then it's
kind
like,
of cosmic,
Dave Franco's going to make a movie. And then there's another one called Sea Fever. And I was like,
I was going to ask if you had heard of Sea Fever.
Oh yeah,
but the thing is, like Terry said, though, they have similar thematic elements, but they are all executed so drastically differently that it's amazing to I love watching all these movies that are obviously playing off of each other, but have such awesome creative spins on it. At least in my perspective, I love doing that. I think it's amazing. So
I'm going to watch The Rental the day that I can. I'm ready for it, but it's like one of those. I'm just competitive, but I think I get that though. It's like an indie film trope too, a little bit. It's like that's when you isolate people and it's like it's going to be, you can do it on a budget because it's one location limited. And that was also something with the Beach House where it's like I wanted to take that and then just push it as far as I could in terms of what the audience would think about, in terms of beyond just interpersonal. It's going from interpersonal relationships to, a cosmic sense of self. Sorry, back to The Rental, not to talk about my movie more.
Well, it's weird because, again, there's some similarities, but the last half, it feels very jarring in terms of what happens.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really talk about why it does or does not work for me because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But it's a good movie. I think it's definitely. I'm glad it's coming out. I think it'll do really well for IFC. It's just, it's not what I was expecting. But man, the cast is really awesome. I mean, you have Alison Brie and you have Dan Stevens. I mean, God, I love Dan Stevens.
Yeah.
He is so. Every single movie I see him in, he looks completely different. I don't know what it is about that man. But yeah, so I watched that. And then also I'm reading for a different podcast I'm guesting on. I'm reading Black House by Stephen King.
Okay.
And Peter Straub. I read it when it first came out, like in 2001, I think it was, and it's the sequel to their book, The Talisman. But it's kind of a sequel in the same way that like Doctor Sleep is a sequel to The Shining, where it's, other than the character, it doesn't really have a direct continuation for it. Have either of you read Black House?
No, I have not.
I read The Talisman.
Okay.
Years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
Kind of when I was in my Stephen King phase, which will come up with Pet Sematary. But no, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, so it's the character from The Talisman, Jack Sawyer. He's grown up. He doesn't remember anything about his time when he was backpacking across the United States to save his mom. And it's very bleak. I forgot how dark it is, because like they basically it's about a serial killer that's basically emulating the methods of Albert Fish.
Ew,
So-
what the fuck? Are you serious?
Yeah, the serial killer, child rapist, and cannibal from like the early 1900s. So it's very fucking grim.
Yeah, no shit. There is no way you can emulate Albert Fish without it being grim. He's a fucking weirdo. He lit his own ass on fire because he enjoyed the feel of pain. Like, he stuck needles in his dick. I'm sorry.
Yikes.
I have a lot of feelings about Albert Fish, which is weird to say. But anyway, sorry.
So it's kind of like this. It's a small town, and then this killer is going around and abducting children and murdering them and devouring parts of their body.
Yo, what the fuck?
I forgot, like I remember reading it back in 2001 and being like so like put off by it, because I was like, oh, it's a sequel to The Talisman, because The Talisman's like this fantasy, and it's like, you know, it's bleak and there's some darkness to it, but it's like a fantasy novel. And then I get to this and it's like a fucking serial killer that's killing and eating kids. So
yeah, that sounds fine.
It's
Just kidding.
I'm enjoying it. Question mark, a lot more than I kind of expected to, given the subject matter, rereading it. But, yeah, man, it's it's fucking bleak. But what about you, Mary Beth? Follow that.
I don't know how to follow that one.
Here's
at
a grenade.
all. I have not been reading or consuming any media about Albert Fish.
What?
Unfortunately. But I did watch an awesome indie movie called Toad Road.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I've seen that.
And I know that a lot of people don't like this movie, but I absolutely adored it. Toad Road is about these friends that do stupid shit, and it kind of focuses on this one guy and a girl who get into this relationship, and then they go onto Toad Road. When you walk through, it's like the 7 gateways to hell. It's like a very basic overview. And so it's shot, it looks like found footage. It's not a found footage movie, but it's shot in such a way that it looks like it is, like in terms of that kind of verite style where it looks like if someone amateur is operating the camera, or it's like someone's recording it on their cell phone. But I think I really liked it. And a lot of the things I've read about it have been like, if you had a friend group like this when you were growing up, this movie will resonate with you probably. And I very much had a friend group like this. We're like in college where we were a bunch of hippies, and like I had a lot of friends who did a lot of drugs and like did really stupid shit. And it was like weirdly endearing and sad, and it becomes a little bit of a story about addiction, and I have lost a couple friends to addiction. So it is actually a very emotionally effective and strange film. And I had heard a lot of negative things about it, and I thought it was going to be kind of boring, but I thought it was very interesting and beautiful. But that was just my experience with it. I can see why people might be bored by it, because it's not like as horror-y as you might want it to be, but I absolutely loved it, and I think it's worth giving a try. Don't go in expecting like a full-on horror monster movie, but go in expecting something very sad about like the horrors of being a young adult who is like so lost and not sure what to do with themselves, and like what that kind of manifests as.
I saw it years ago. I really liked it too. I think I really like movies that kind of treat the supernatural in new kind of ways.
Yeah, exactly.
And that one, you know, the only I watched. Do you see Starfish? Do you know that movie?
I absolutely love Starfish.
I did too. I thought it did something. I thought those movies had something in common where they're really, and it's been years since I saw Toad Road, but I remember I love the poster for it, and I really thought it was a really good little weird movie. And Starfish has a similar. They're very idiosyncratic. They feel very personal, and I like both of those films very much.
Exactly. I really liked the personal feel of Toad Road and the fact that it felt like someone was making almost a documentary about their friends rather than a fictional horror movie. So that's the big one I've really enjoyed. And we talked about Relic last week, but really, I watched that movie twice, and that, everyone needs to please watch Relic. It made me cry, and I love horror movies that make me cry. So, but those are the two big things. Oh, actually, I can talk about this book I just bought. So I bought a book called The Vampire Film, From Nosferatu to True Blood. I bought the 4th edition of it, and it's this giant book about vampires. And I'm super excited to dive into it because, and I can actually talk about this, I'm writing a chapter for a book about vampires. And specifically, I'm writing about representations of masculinity in The Vampire's Kiss and in American Psycho. So I am very excited to delve into corporate America becoming a symbol for vampirism and sucking the life dry of the working class.
Oh yeah,
that sounds cool.
But yeah, so this book I didn't realize how big it was in a good way, and it's a really awesome compendium of the history of the vampire film from Nosferatu to, this was last updated in 2011. So it's got it's got a lot of good stuff in there. So if you're looking for a good book about vampire movies, I would recommend it.
What about you, Jeff?
The movie I watched a film on Hulu, I think called VHS Yes. Are you guys familiar with that film?
Oh, I haven't seen it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's interesting, and I kind of loved it, and then I was kind of not irritated by it. It's really, so the whole concept is that these kids find an old VHS tape that's been recorded over and over time. And so you're watching that tape. So different commercials come through and exercise videos and kind of TV shows. And then there's the kids filming themselves. And then it gets into, it's very funny. I mean, it's a lot of the guys that were in The State or in Reno 911 are in it. So there's kind of that. There's kind of a Mr. Show or SCTV, it's an absurd, very funny movie. And then it goes off and there's a found footage sequence that is actually pretty freaky, and I was it's one of those.
Hell yeah!
Yeah, I would recommend it. It's very short. It's only 76 minutes, and there's part of me that was I wish this was just a channel on TV that just always played these kind of weird, and they use a lot of the old, VHS kind of distortion is in an effect to it. It's not. I enjoyed it. I'm kind of resistant to be this is the best movie I've ever seen. It's definitely it's a good hour and 16 minutes, well spent, especially, and there's a couple other kind of absurd movies that are kind of similar, like Greener Grass, where they're just always swinging for the fences. Every scene is a joke or has a payoff, and not all of them connect, but goddamn, if I'm going to stop someone from trying.
Hell yeah.
And I'm reading a book called Blind Sight, which is by this science fiction author named Peter Watts. And it kind of resembles Event Horizon in a strange way. It's about but not. It's very strange. I'm having some of these. I like reading I like reading fiction that challenges me, and it's in the future. Some things I can't quite. I haven't finished it yet, so he's kind of withholding some information about some of the main characters because they're all kind of genetically modified, or they've had these. One is a schizophrenic that has 4 distinct personalities that take over. And then there's one of the characters, and Mary Beth, feel this, the captain is a vampire, a legit vampire.
Hell yeah.
Way smarter than everybody else. And so that's why the whole crew is very skeptical of the vampire, because they're always he's looking at us like we're lunch. And then he's evolved. And I don't quite know why everyone is on this ship, and then some alien, or it's a first contact story where an alien ship has come into our solar system, and they send these people out to go kind of explore it, and they go. It's very kind of this a little bit of a rival. It's just humans trying to communicate with a truly alien sensibility. I read another book by him called Starfish, actually, weirdly enough, that's about the bottom of the ocean and has some more Beach House similarities, but I actually read it after we finished the movie, and I was like, oh man, I should have read this in prep. But
That's
he's
cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like a lot of. I try to read a lot of contemporary science fiction. That I try to read a little bit of everything.
Cool. Well, okay, so we've talked about what we have been watching and enjoying recently, but Jeff, what movie are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about Pet Sematary.
It is the place where devoted pets are laid to rest.
What did we do tonight, Judd?
What we did, Lois, was a secret. But nothing buried there ever rests in peace.
Come back to me, Gage.
Paramount Pictures presents Stephen King's chilling bestseller, Pet Sematary, rated R. Now playing at theaters everywhere.
Eager to start afresh, the young Dr. Lewis Creed and his family, wife Rachel, their daughter Ellie, and their 3-year-old toddler Gage, moved to their new home in the small rural town of Ludlow, Maine, alarmingly close to a busy highway. After tragedy strikes, Lewis discovers the allure of the ancient burial ground behind his home that has the power to raise the dead. And Lewis will sometimes learn that dead is better.
Sometimes that is better.
All right, Jeff, I need your Judd Crandall.
The Fred Gwynn, where he's so good. I like sometimes the main accent is the hardest. It's like the hardest accent to do in the country. Yeah.
So very excited to talk about Pet Sematary. So Jeff, how old were you when you first saw this movie? Paint us a picture of your first experience with Pet Sematary.
Okay. All right. So this is actually the Brown family comes into this. I was a very avid reader when I was young, and I think my aunt, who she's passed away, but she was reading Stephen King, and I must have been like 10 years old, and I started reading him, and this was in the late 80s, and Pet Sematary was the first Stephen King book that I read, and I was a kid.
Oh, wow.
And then, kind of like with Stephen King, you get addicted to him. And so I bought a bunch of them, and I was reading them. And my parents at that point were like, he's reading, so that's great, And then I was famous for really wanting to see R-rated movies when my parents wouldn't let me. I have an older brother, and he was always like, you could see anything you wanted. I was the one who was repressed. Like, I couldn't see anything. Like, they bent everything for you. And then,
oh my God, that's totally me and my brother.
That's
awesome.
also,
My brother's the
that's
younger
also
one.
I'm the oldest, and I say that to my brothers all the fucking time.
Yeah, I'm sure you're like, you got away with murder. They
he
were so
continue to
rough.
get away with murder. I'm like, the fuck, you get away with too much. Like, I was on a short leash, not that bad, but like compared to what they get to do, Jesus.
But there were always like a movie that would come out, and I would really want to go see it. And like The Lost Boys was a big one in our household when I was like, I think I was 9 or 10, and I was like, it's like, Mom and Dad, I really want to go see The Lost Boys. Like, it's R-rated. You're not going to see that. And I would beg them, and they didn't take me to The Lost Boys. And so Pet Sematary, I guess it came out in 89, so I must have been 11. And I was, it was one of those things where it's like every morning it's like, Mom and Dad, it's 5 days till Pet Cemetery. Are we ready to go? And they're like, I don't know about this one. I was like, I've already read the book. Come on. And so we went opening night in Valparaiso, Indiana on a packed Friday night. And I talked to my mom about it, and I was like, had you read the book before we saw the movie or after? And she couldn't remember which. And so I think she might have read it afterwards. So we went to go see it, and then the movie, it's pretty scary. I think for a kid, it's pretty adult, and it has a place in the Brown household because it's the only film my parents have ever walked out on. And it got to the point where Judd Crandall, when he gets his from Gage, my father looked over at my mother and was like, "We are out of here." And he took us out of the theater, and I was mortified. Like, the whole audience was seeing us leave, and we got back, and it's like he put all my Stephen King books on the table, and we sat there, and he's like, "What in the hell are you reading?"
Oh, no.
And he took them all away, and it was kind of like, but I like Stephen King, Daddy. And he's like, no, that is not for you. And then my brother didn't come, and he was like, oh man, Jeff is in trouble. And like, but then my mother read Pet Sematary later, and I remember having a very kind of a conversation with her, and she was like, that book has like, it really conveys evil. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, there's something about that. There's a force that was drawing these people in just to prey on them, that she was like, and my mother was raised Catholic. To her, The Exorcist, she's like, that is the scariest movie ever made. And it's like, because we thought it was going to happen. And my father's like, Psycho's the scariest movie ever made. It's a brown debate. But I always remember that. And the movie, I mean, I think I had nightmares for weeks, primarily because of Zelda.
Rachel? Is that you? I finally came back for you, Rachel. I'm going to twist your back like mine, so you'll never get out of bed again. Never get out of bed again. Never get out of bed again. Never get out of bed again.
Yes.
The
Zelda.
voice of Zelda, I think it was a man playing the role. So it kind of does, it did these weird, it's a horror, it's very scary. And when I saw it, that it stayed with me for years. And I think I finally saw it when I was in high school. And then I kind of went back through kind of my Netflix to see the last time I'd seen it before I watched it last week was, like about 15 years ago. And I remember still liking it. I don't think it quite held up, but Zelda, the voice of Zelda stayed with me for years. And I think there's an element of Zelda in the beach house there. And there's a shot of the woods. It has a blue glow. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but I was like, holy shit. Like that's our movie. Like I didn't even think about it,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very personal movie for me.
Yeah.
So did you not, how long until you were able to read Stephen King again after that moment?
Oh, not too long. They kind of bent, and I was like, Eyes of the Dragon. I was like, that's a book for kids. He wrote it for his kids, Dad. Like, how bad could that be?
That's the book that got me into reading Stephen King was Eyes of the Dragon.
Really? There was the run. It's like from Pet Sematary to Needful Things. I think I read that was when I was like really into Stephen King. But they relinquished it quickly because again, it's like the kids reading. Like, who am I to stop him from reading? And then it's like Stephen King got into Dean Koontz, got into Clive Barker, and then it was like William Burroughs and stuff, which is they're all kind of just more and more levels of extremity, at a very precocious age. Yeah, and watching it again was interesting, and I watched that, and I watched the remake kind of back to back, just to kind of raise my head, and I kind of liked them the same. I definitely didn't like the movie. I still felt that there was a couple shots of Zelda. There was like 2 shots of Zelda in particular where I was like, oh, that works. That's freaky. And Judd Crandall's death is so nasty.
Oh, it's awful.
It's horrible.
So I can't I can't take Zelda seriously. I really can't.
Well, okay, let's clear the air here. Terry does not like Pet Sematary.
I don't know. When did you see it?
Terry doesn't like this movie.
I don't.
It's fine. You're not offending me.
I will say that this last watch, I enjoyed it a lot more than I ever have before. But I still do not really care for this movie. And I was trying to think back to when I saw it, because when I'm hearing you talk, Jeff, I'm like, oh yeah, this kind of reminds me a little bit of my childhood, where it's like there was a time where my parents started restricting the movies that I would watch, and so I got into reading, and I would read a lot of Stephen King because my parents were like, he's reading a book, this is good. So I started like down this really long path of reading all of these Stephen King novels that were way above my head as like I would think I was in 5th grade when I started reading.
Oh, yes.
Totally.
Yep, same.
So like Pet Sematary was one of my favorite books growing up. which is so weird to say, my favorite book growing up, but it really was. I really, really enjoyed it because it reminded me, I mean, I wouldn't be able to put pieces together, but it reminded me of when I was thinking back on it, of like some of the EC comics, or like, you know, the Tales from the Crypt, where it's like this kind of almost darkly comedic way of destroying this person because he does something wrong, and so like they get their comeuppance in the end. And like I remember the way the book ended, I was like, wow, this is the best book I've ever read when I was a kid. And so before I even saw the movie and before I even read the book, I remember seeing the poster and the box art of this movie, and it scared the crap out of me. Just the picture of Pascal on the front with like the blood on his head, and it terrified me as a kid. Like I remember, oh God, that movie looks so scary. And I don't think I saw it until I was in my teens, and it never worked for me. I've never really liked this movie.
I'm gonna tell you, in both, I think the remake, I had a big problem with both the remake and the original. Watching it this time, it has, Roger Ebert used to talk about the idiot plot. Oh, where the movie, the movie doesn't work if someone's not an idiot. And it's like, why in the hell would he bury the cat? Why would Judge be like, you know what? It's never worked before, but this time I think what would be a great idea is for you to bury your daughter's dead cat in the pet cemetery.
That's the thing that never worked for me in the original, but I will say that it did kind of work for me in the new one because of the fact that there's like that kind of pull from the swamp. Like originally he's going to bury it in the remake. Judd is like, we're going to bury it in the pet cemetery.
I got a spot for you.
And then they're in the cemetery. He's about ready to start digging, and then he looks to the deadfall, and it's almost as if like the swamp is like pulling him.
Yeah.
Ellie really loved that cat, didn't she? More than anything. And you love Ellie. Of course. So follow me.
But in the original, it's just like,
maybe there's a better way.
Oh yeah, I got this great idea for you, and I'm like, do you though? Do you really, Judd?
Well, wasn't it because they helped his wife who had a heart attack, right?
In the book, yeah.
In the book it was. And I, like, that made a lot of sense to me, but in the movie, I was like, in rewatching it today, I was like, wait.
Yeah.
What? I was like, didn't you just tell him it was bad?
Yeah, there's a big hole there where you're just like, why would you ever do that? You know?
Yeah.
And the lead actor is a little, he's not great either.
He's terrible.
Yeah.
He's terrible.
He's just like he's like a kind of a hot guy from the 80s who has no idea what he's doing. Like,
he definitely was like hot dad for me, but I'm like, no, you are not a good actor. You cannot carry the emotional weight of this movie.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, he's like, it's a very strange, awkward. I wonder if the actor was like unhappy. It was like, it's a weird role. I was just like, wow, that's rough going right there. And the Victor Pascal thing is kind of like,
okay, let's talk about Victor Pascal, because I was texting Terry about this today, and I was like, I think I'm realizing that the Pascal thing is really confusing. To my brain.
The supernatural rules are not, I don't know. I always, they don't work. I don't understand. I don't remember the book. It's been so long since I read the book, but I was having a lot of trouble in both the remake and the new one. And the original. I was like, what? So why, what, the Wendigo and why is this happening? And I was just a little like, I don't know. I wasn't super into it. It didn't age well.
I will say that I think I liked it more than both of you, but yes, but yeah, Victor Pascal. And watching it this time, I was like, wait, hold on, I don't quite understand the link. Like, I get the link, but like, I still don't totally understand like how they made the leap where like Pascal was connected to Lewis.
He says his name when he dies. It was something like it's I think in the book, it's like one of those things where in the book you could probably buy it a bit easier.
Yeah, because in the book it was because he was running across the road. He was going for a run or something, and he was running on that road, the same road where they live, and he got hit by a truck. And I think there was like some connection between the location and the truck and like that whole area being pretty like spiritually / like supernaturally paranormally active. And I think that's why there was just like some kind of link forged by his method of death and where it happened. I think, if I remember. Do you remember, Terry?
Well, I think in the book also there's kind of like this idea, because, you know, he was writing this, and I think that it kind of ties a little bit into his grand plan of like his universe that he's creating, where it's like, I think Ellie had The Shining. And I think,
oh shit, that's a good. I didn't even think about that.
And I think that like he probably had it a little bit as well. He didn't have it as much as Ellie did, but like so like they're seeing the ghost, and I because like in the book there's like all these little bit more connections to maybe that she is sort of like little Doc was in The Shining.
Okay. That makes sense. Because I read, so last year, I hadn't seen this movie until last year, because as a kid growing up, Pet Sematary was this like the movie everyone talked about as being terrifying, and I love animals so much that like I refused to watch it. And I also didn't realize it was about like kids dying. I thought it was just about animals coming back and attacking people, like a horde of animals. Like I had this image in my head that Pet Sematary was about like a horde of like angry dead like rabbits and raccoons and dogs and cats like attacking a house. Like that's what I thought Pet Sematary was for a very long time, because I refused to look it up or watch it. So like I had this whole story built up in my head that was incorrect. But then I watched it today, and so to get like big sad, my cat went to the hospital yesterday. So I was watching this movie and I was like, this is a bummer. I was like, this is a big fucking bummer. But then I was like, but church is like, I love church, even though church is a dick. Like,
yeah,
I love church. But it is so funny because I didn't want to watch when I was a kid because I was so connected to animals. I like was so scared of it. And then I watched, I listened to the audiobook last year, and I watched the old one, or this original one, in preparation for the new one to come out. So like, actually I can credit the new one for getting me more into Pet Sematary.
The new one's weird. You know, I thought that that they changed the ending completely. In a way I kind of like applaud them for that, because it's like I watched it in my house. I didn't see it with a in a theater, but I think that the expectations and kind of changing that, for some reason I think I knew that they had done that, and that didn't. I kind of liked that. I was like, oh well, way to go. I love Amy Simons as an actor.
Yeah,
I can watch her in pretty much anything. I think she's just a really compelling actress. I love Upstream Color, and so I like that aspect, and I love the scene in the remake where Church comes back. Like he takes him out to the woods, and he comes right before Ellie is killed, where the cat goes on this journey back. And I don't think that's in the book, but I thought that was a really I think that was my favorite scene in the remake. But I liked them both about the same. I felt that one thing I did I kind of remembered a bit better is that there's a real thing about the weight of a father. It's like kind of the fear of a father telling their kids about death. And also being an irresponsible parent. I think that is like this writ large. And I felt that aspect of it was kind of removed from the remake a little bit, and was still kind of there in the original. Because I thought the original played it pretty close from what I remember to the book.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, that's kind of, I kind of think that's my problem. It's like, I don't think Stephen King is a good screenwriter. Mm-hmm. And so the times when he's like written or readapted his work for screen, it never works for me. And the fact that he wrote this, like I can see all of the, like the 89 movie is fairly, in tune with the book in terms of like plot. I feel that it's missing so much of what made the book so powerful. Like there's this fear in Lewis in the book of Well, and he kind of uses it as a very small plot point in the movie, but it's this idea of like being castrated, where like it's a huge thing that he doesn't want to castrate Church in the book. Like it's this big huge thing that he'll never be the same that he is now, that he'll be completely different. And even when in the book, when he's like climbing over to go dig up Gage, he's like looking at the spikes in the cemetery gate and is like, man, one false move and I'm going to lose a testicle. Like he's so concerned about this idea of like, of masculinity and this idea of keeping this nuclear family together that it's kind of, it makes me laugh in terms of the book, because he does everything in his power to try to keep this nuclear family together, even though what he's doing is so not going to help him out. I mean, from the, you start the movie with him, perfect family, husband, wife, 2 kids, daughter, son, cat, living in this beautiful house. He's a doctor. She's a stay-at-home mom. Like you have like, especially in the 80s, this like idea of what the nuclear family would be. And he wants so desperately to keep that together that he's willing to do anything to not face the fact that he can never have that again.
Yeah, and I think that's something that bothers me with Stephen King sometimes because, well, one, I understand what you mean about the screenwriting. I think what I love about King's writing first is that he gets really into his characters' heads. And I think that's difficult on screen, especially if you're writing. I mean, I don't know anything about writing screenplays, but if you're writing that novel, I feel like it has to be so hard to like remove that interiority from your scripts and like figure out how to achieve that kind of like introspection. But what I think bothers me about a lot of his work, and I think Terry, I was telling you about this today, I was just like, a lot of his movies, or a lot of his books are just about like fragile masculinity and fragile male egos, which is very much, I think, him being, in the 70s and 80s, like he was obviously working through some shit himself as a writer. And it's interesting, but also kind of exhausting just for me as like a woman in horror reading his books and watching his movies. It's a little bit repetitive, I think, and I get a little bit bored. I don't know if that's terrible, because I think it is really important to write about fragile masculinity and like these problems that men have, because there's a lot of issues with not giving men interiority and giving male characters like space like for nuance and growth. But I sometimes feel like those characters in the movie, like in the movie adaptations, they're so flat. They become so flat, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like this kind of, that aspect of it, of the masculinity of Lewis is, I didn't even think about it when watching it this time. I primarily like, I mean, if I read Stephen King now, and I don't read it that often, I think I've read Thinner. Just for me, I when I'm writing a screenplay, I was adapting a novel actually a couple months ago. I try to read novels that are fast paced and page turners. And Stephen King is one of the best page turners. Like you can, I think I reread the Tommyknockers a couple years ago, and it's like an 800-page book that I read in like 5 days. And that's a real skill as a writer. A couple noir writers kind of do that too, like Lawrence Block. You pick them up and you just turn the pages. But I don't even think about the depth of his books in a weird way anymore. Like I read Thinner, I wasn't even, I wasn't picking up on the nuances. I was reading it more for the action and more for the, I wanted to seep into my writing so that every screenplay I write, I want the pages to fly. And so that's more my attraction to Stephen King than some of these. But I think he's very much, the Pet Sematary and The Shining especially is, keeping up with the Joneses and being I think there's a lot about being a failure. It's like, and what you were saying about, they have this perfect family and he's doing anything to keep it together. But it's like, he has all these perfect elements around him, but still he bought the house that's close to the road that's going to put his kids in jeopardy. So he's still, he's a fuck up, even though he's got everything laid out in front of him. And he's still, and I think King was probably, King was kind of an outcast and was wrestling with some of these things, especially with The Shining too, where it's another situation where it's just like putting his family in jeopardy. Yeah. I like the metaphors in him and actually it's like, it's kind of a Pet Sematary, even though I don't want to watch it again anytime soon. It'd make a good double feature with The Brood, with Cronenberg's The Brood.
Yes, that's such a good double feature.
And because he's Cronenberg, especially in that one, he gets much more abstract, but that's very much about divorce. It's about what effect divorce is going to have on his children. And, I think there's a similarity between the nuclear, keeping up with the Joneses. And I don't, especially in America right now, and even before the pandemic, which is, going to be a defining moment of our time. I think the aspect of keeping up with the Joneses, I can't speak for you guys, but that doesn't really apply to my wife and I. We're like, who are the Joneses? Like, we don't know who they are.
We don't want to know any of these people.
I also feel like my partner and I actively try to reject that, like, at all times. Like, we have 2 cats and we refuse to have children. Like, we are actively working against that stereotype.
I mean, but isn't that the American dream in a sense is the Joneses, and I think that maybe what I think we're seeing right now is we have to reevaluate what the American dream is, and Stephen King I think was dealing with that very, very explicitly in a lot of those early in that kind of first wave of his books.
For sure.
The thing is like this. That's something I picked up this time watching this movie that made me maybe appreciate it a little bit more, is the way that like it uses this idea of the kind of American dream marriage as like a foundation, because the only other characters that we see is Missy.
Always thought it would be lucky to marry a doctor. Wish I had a doctor around with my stomach pain so bad. Guess I'll never be lucky. Hell, I ain't married to anyone.
Who is childless. She even makes a mention the fact that she's, so unlucky she's never been married, and she's fighting cancer and she ends up hanging herself. So like, this is the alternative.
The saddest thing ever, and like just so random in the movie.
It is, but it's also like, and I don't believe that Missy was in the book, because I think she kind of took over the role of Judd's wife that was exercised from the movie. But like, I mean, that's what is the alternative to having this wife and the kids and the cat and the house, is we have poor Missy who ends up hanging herself alone because she can't deal with the fact that, she's dying of cancer. And so she takes it into her own hands. It was such like a representation of what the 80s was, in terms of like, having that little house in the suburbs, away from the city, in this small little town, and how quaint it is, and how ultimately it's kind of, it devolves and destroys itself.
Well, yeah, and they're like, oh yeah, we left Chicago, the big city of Chicago, and like moved to this tiny town in Maine. Yeah, quaint town in Maine, and it's always just like the rumination. The thing I think that stuck out to me when reading the book, listening to the book, was like this rumination about making sure the move was the right thing to do. Because that's something I've dealt with my family, is like moving when you're like, your kids are kind of aware of it, and moving, doing a big move. And like, it like, I think watching this as an adult affected me more. I think when I would watch it as a kid, I don't think it would have been like, it would have been terrifying. But watching it as an adult, it gets like, upsets me. It makes me very sad. I think because, one, it's stereotypical. I can't handle death of children in movies. Like, I don't know why, but like every time with the Gage, it just breaks my heart. But also, it's just like the deep sadness of being a parent in general, and like how isolating and lonely being a parent can be. And I think that really gets to me when I watch this movie. And I think that's why it makes me so upset, and I still enjoy it, because there's like this really awful melancholy to it.
I think it's all, I mean, yeah, it's a very dark, and I think the Gage, first off, the casting of the kid who plays Gage is just,
so
it's
small.
Like the cutest kid in the world,
right?
And he turns into this demon from hell. I mean, there some of the scenes though where he's like throwing the kid around though and are horrible. They just look terrible. But I think
I found myself laughing so hard.
Oh, it's so bad. Not good.
When he shows up wearing the top hat and a vaudevillian outfit.
I love it. Shut up.
I was dying. I'm like, okay, this is camp. We have now entered camp.
I think the funeral scene it's like bonkers. Like,
the funeral scene is bananas.
I hope you rot in hell. Where were you when he was playing in the road? You stinking shit. You killer of children! Oh, Daddy!
Ellie!
What planet are we on? And it's just like it doesn't quite work. But I think that was something also going back to my experience with my parents in the theater. I think also the fact that it was Herman Munster is Judd, and I think my father, because it was my father who made us leave, and I think that. And I love Fred Gwynn in the movie, but that murder is so nasty.
Yeah.
It's just
It really is.
so base. And I was like talking about it with actually a friend of mine, and I was like, and he has 2 kids that are a little bit older, and they're very cute. And I was like, I wouldn't watch that movie, man. It's like you don't want to think about your kids like biting out your throat. It's just like, oh, horrible. Like,
speaking of that scene, what it jumped out at me this time watching it was how much it felt like a callback to Night of the Living Dead. With the girl in the basement.
Right.
Because like super sweet, and she was super sweet and coming forward, and then she's like biting her mom and eating her mom, and the way it was shot. Watching it this time, I was like, oh, this is definitely like a kind of a Night of the Living Dead callback or an homage, I think.
I managed Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die, and so it was
cool.
So it was a great experience. I mean, it was just so cool. But the huge reference was to Night of the Living Dead in the movie, and so it was like driving around in the Catskills trying to find a farm that looks like the farm from Night of the Living Dead. It's like it was just an amazing experience. It's like beats work. Like, how awesome is that?
Yeah.
But it was really, I really enjoyed doing that. But I that's a super awesome call about Night of the Living Dead and Pet Sematary. I never thought about it. It is kind of it is like a zombie movie, though, isn't it? In a weird way.
I mean, the dead come back to life and start eating people. I mean, it's a zombie movie. But what we kind of put we like to like tease out on Twitter, and people will respond like how the movie scared them, and so many people it was Zelda, right? And she never worked for me, but I'm telling you, the last few times I've watched this movie, I think Schitt's Creek has ruined it for me. Because
what?
Okay, I'm going to share these, and we'll post them on Twitter.
Are those the images? Oh,
but
I think I know what you're talking about.
Here's a GIF, and I'm putting it in a little chat of Zelda sitting up.
Is it David?
No, this is of Zelda. But I'm telling you, you watch that, and then you watch this, and it is totally Alexis's hand move.
That shot is so scary. That's like one of the scary ones of
but
Zelda.
It's not for me, because it's totally Alexis doing a little hand thing from Schitt's Creek.
Oh my God, Terry! No.
Yes, her little hand thing.
I don't.
Maybe
I'm telling you, it's ruined for me. It's ruined for me. I can't, because her little hands, floppy little Alexis hands from Schitt's Creek. I'm telling you.
Well, speaking of Zelda, who the fuck leaves their small child to take care of their sick daughter is so frustrating to me. I know that's the point, but it's just like, the fuck? The trauma of this movie. And it is always so interesting. Oh my God, I just forgot her name. The wife's name.
Rachel. It
just like, I'm so glad that the remake did more like kind of focus on her a little bit more, because I always thought her story was much more interesting. Sorry, to me it was. And I was like, I just want to know more about her, because it seems like she has all of these like traumas and things going on in her life that I would love to like tap into and understand. And it's just weird to me that she like had a really awesome kind of backstory, but then it kind of falls off and she's just kind of a support character. And I'm glad though that Pet Sematary from 2019 tried to kind of not course correct, but like a little bit more like especially our time, like move towards focusing on her experiences.
And they never, in the original one, they don't seem like they're really in love, like at all. And you barely see them like having any kind of romantic interactions with each other until...
Hey, they have that one really awkward kiss at the car.
I kissed you.
Or the little kids, it's, hey, I kissed you
Yeah.
too. And that's
I mean,
weird, but...
other than that, like, there's really not much, like, caring and warmth between the two of them until she becomes a zombie and they're making out with her oozing eye at the very end.
Yeah, that was a weird. That's a good. Let's hit some ooze on this scene. Let's really drive it home.
Surprise! This is actually just a movie about how Stephen King wants to fuck dead bodies. Silence. I was yes.
Didn't get that, but maybe
you didn't get that subtext.
I missed that one.
Wow.
Anyway.
Wow.
And on that note,
where do we go from there?
Do we want to wrap up, Terry? Do we want to give us our ratings out of 5?
Yes.
I'm so glad that was the final word. Wow.
Yeah, wow.
I feel like that's an accomplishment for me.
I feel like you've uncovered something. That's your next book.
Oh my god. Hot take. Terry, how many main accents out of 5 do you give Pet Sematary? And what are your final thoughts?
Well, as much as I would love to give a lot of main accents, because the main accents in this movie are some of my favorite things, I have to give it 2 main accents that maybe sometimes dead is better.
Ground is sour.
The soil of a man's heart, Estonia.
Right. What is that? What does that mean? That's one of those that doesn't. Dead is better.
Yeah.
I get, but
just sit there and just think about it.
The soil of a man's heart.
Estonia. What? I mean, this movie has never resonated with me. And I love the book. I still think it's one of my top 5 King. When I was listening to it with the amazing audiobook that was Michael C. Hall reading it, like last year when I was listening to it, I think the book is a darkly comedic masterpiece. I think it's funny. I think the book is really funny, as much as like people don't think it is. I think it reminds me of the AC Comics, the kind of like darkly ironic kind of like getcha humor. And I feel that I think I have a little bit more of an appreciation for this film now. I think it's camp. I think that there's a lot of
camp.
I think that there's a lot of camp in this movie towards the end.
Okay.
I see. I hear you. I see that.
I think that, especially the vaudeville gauge is.
I think from the moment of the funeral with the punch out to the end, it turns into this movie that is like, how bonkers can we go and how much can we like eke out of this? And I think you actually see it a little bit more in the sequel that Mary Lambert directed, which I finally watched for the first time today, and it's not good, but man, is it funny as hell. It is everything of this movie like amped up to 10 in terms of like
intentionally funny or like funny because it's bad.
Uncertain.
Okay.
But it's a wild sequel. But yeah, so I think 2 out of 5 for me, honestly. Okay. I still think the remake is a lot better. Sorry about it.
Oh, hold on. The train is coming.
Oh.
The train is coming to take your takeaway.
Yeah, I know. I think the sequel actually, because one of the things that I think is missing from this movie is the fact that we spend in the book so much time in Lewis's head that it starts to take on a sick rationalization in terms of why you would want to do it.
Yeah.
And I think this remake, I think, allows us to sit with that decision a lot longer, because I mean, let's in the original movie, you know, once the kid is back, you know, it's a slasher. He's going out and killing people. Whereas like in the remake, we actually see what happens. What is going to happen if this ended up coming to life, and he has to deal with this, with what he did. And it's a good portion of the movie where it's just the two of them. And then he tries to create this whole family unit that will fall apart the moment reality comes in form of his wife and his son coming back. So I don't know. I think I think the remake is a lot better, but this movie, 2 main accents.
Okay.
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 What about you, Mary Beth?
I will give Pet Sematary 3 main accents out of 5. I definitely like this movie a lot more than you, Terry. However, I'm very conscious of its issues, especially on a rewatch, in terms of just like some stony acting and some interesting plot holes. But I still am so affected by the melancholy that I think they're still able to portray in the movie that I will still give it 3 because it breaks my heart when I watch it. It makes me laugh when he reacts to Church jumping on him like multiple times. Some of my favorite moments are when he gets scared by Church
in the bathtub.
But
I love that scene.
In the bathtub when he drops the rat on him.
Ah! Ouch!
Amazing. But I just think there's something about Pet Sematary that gets under my skin that, like, even if it's, you know, parts of it are bad, there's something about it that will always, like, deeply affect me. So I'm going to give it an extra accent for that, you know, for that effect upon my psyche. All right, Jeff, you have the final word. What is your rating?
Can I give it a half? I'm going to give it 2.5.
We can do 2.5. There's really no rules here.
It definitely did not hold up for me. I thought there was a couple moments that did work. I like the design of the Pet Sematary of the of the Micmac burial ground or the. I thought that was super cool. I thought that, you know, the lead Louis Creed is not good. I would give the remake 2.5 as well. It's like I like John Lithgow generally. I like Fred Gwynne more than John Lithgow. But I like the couple, you know, Amy Seimetz and who is it? Who's playing Jason?
I can't.
I can see his like his
Jason Clarke.
Yeah.
He's got like a very like defined jaw.
I liked the kid. You know, child actors are really. I like the girl in the remake that when she gets evil, I thought that was really, really, really creepy and really, really good. And also, you notice they didn't mention the Timmy Baderman story.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see what was, you know, in both of them and what was kind of glossed over, because I think that if they included that in the remake, it would take away from Ellie's transformation.
Yeah.
But I didn't buy ever why Judd would show the Pet Sematary to Louis in both versions. I just did not. I was both times like, man, this is stupid. But I thought that the original does have some effective moments, and it's so part of me that it's hard to completely just, you know, diss it. But yeah, it was a bit of a letdown. I'm not gonna watch it anytime again soon.
Yeah.
Valid.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us to talk about Pet Sematary.
This was great.
Thank you. I had a great time. I love talking about these movies that scared us as kids, because I just think it's so fun to revisit them as grown-ups. But where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up?
Well, I mean, you know, we got The Beach House on Shudder, which everyone should watch ASAP. It should be out by the time this airs, so I'd watch that. I'm as with everything in film right now, everything's kind of on hold. But I'm writing. I adapted a novel that is very dark, so I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. But I'm writing, and I'm hoping to get the next project off the ground as soon as we emerge from pandemic world. And I have an Instagram. I'm not huge on the social media, but Left Jab 2019. So if anyone wants to find me on Instagram, it's Left Jab 2019, and then that's about it. Just go see The Beach House, and thanks again. Thank you guys for having me. It was really nice.
Of course, it was awesome to talk to you. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Pet Sematary, either 1989 or 2019? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, keep the conversation going by chatting with the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you to everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.